Hey guys, welcome back to a new video. So guys, today we are reading a book which is Napoleon Hill, The Golden Rule of Success. So we are on its chapter 6. So without wasting any time, let's start it reading. Chapter 6. Permanent Success is built on hardship and temporary failure. I come back once more to a subject that lies very close to my heart. The magazine you hold in your hands is the best sort of evidence that adversity is a blessing in disguise because it owes its birth to adversity and temporary failures. The finest thoughts that will find their way into print in these pages are thoughts that were born of struggle and hardship. Turn back the pages of history, back to the very beginning of all that we know of civilization, and you'll find that the men and women whose names lived after they passed on were those whose efforts were born on struggle, hardship, and failure. Men may leave behind than monuments of marble without struggle, hardship, and failure, but those who build monuments in the hearts of their fellow men, where neither the disintegrating forces of the elements nor the degrading hand of man can destroy them, must pay the price in sacrifice and struggle. 10 years ago, a baby was born into one of the wealthiest families in America. The whole world showered the little fellow with gifts it did not need and could not use. One foolish king sent as his offering to the endless collection a gold crib that cost $40,000. I was going to law school in the city where that baby was born, therefore I know considerable about the event. That bountiful showers of gifts reminded me of the passage in the Bible that reads something along this line. To him that hath, it shall be given, and to him and that hath not, it shall be taken away, even that which he hath. Nothing more true to human nature was ever said like this. Like attracts like. Wealth attracts wealth, and poverty attracts poverty. It is a way of human nature. By and by, this little baby grew old enough to be taken on the streets. When he was taken out, he was flanked by a coterie of servants and private detectives whose business it was to see that no misfortune overtook him. Never in all this baby's life was he permitted outside the protecting influence of these servants. He could not go on the street alone. He was watched over with care that would lead one to believe he might have been made of superior clay. This little fellow had no cares. He experienced no hardships. He never knew what struggle meant. All he knew was that he was not born to toil. He didn't have to dress himself. He had servants for that purpose. He did not have to use his eyes. He had servants' eyes to use. He did not have to use his hands. He had servants' hands to use. In fact, he did not have to do anything. Each winter he went with his army of servants to play in the rolling waters of the warm Gulf of Mexico, where he was not bothered with the cold blizzards of the north. When he went out to swim, he was surrounded by this same army of servants who flanked him and watched to see that no harm befell them. 2 years ago, this little fellow, now a boy of 10 years, had just returned to the north from his wintering palace in Florida. He was out in the gardens with his servant when he noticed that the gates were open, and he saw beyond the much longed for freedom that every normal child is constantly seeking. When the servant's vigilance had slacked for a moment, he saw his chance and made a run for the street. He got outside and into the middle of the street when he was run down and instantly killed by a Ford automobile. At the very moment this was happening, there was no less than 1 million little urchins located in the crowded streets of the great cities, not one of which could have been run down by an automobile in an open air field. Because these little unfortunates had learned the art of self-defense out of struggle born of necessity. They had learned to get out of the way of automobiles. Worldly, do we repeat that out of struggle and hardship come endurance and power. Servants and private detective can watch over a baby and possibly keep him from being stolen. They can even keep him from being run down by automobiles if they attend to their duties properly. But the internal law of compensation take its toll when the little fellow grows up to maturity and commences to take his place among men. He pays dearly for the early protection that relieved him from struggle the very first time he is called upon to rely entirely on his own resources, because he finds that he has no real resources. The strong-armed blacksmith develops his strength out of resistance. The greater the resistance, the greater his strength. By wielding a heavy hammer day in and day out, he finally grew a mighty arm that served him wherever physical strength is needed. He developed his strong arm in exactly the same manner that all strength must be developed, by overcoming resistance. We point pride with to Lincoln as being one of the really great Americans of the past, yet many how stops to consider that his strength, both physical and moral, grew out of hardship and struggle. No doubt Nancy Hanks would have given Lincoln as a royal birth as that of the little boy mentioned above, if she had been financially able, but if she had done so, there is but little doubt that Lincoln would never have risen to the heights to which he attained. Much of Lincoln's greatness grew out of his early struggles and hardships, because out of these grew strength, that mighty strength which carried him through one of the most trying crises of the country. The most dangerous handicap with which any child could be surrounded is the handicap of money, provided it is used to relieve the child of struggle. 20 odd years ago, I was secretary to a wealthy man whose two sons were away at college. It was a part of my duty to make out a check for $100 for each of these boys on the first of the month. This was their spending money and spend it they out. Well, do I remember how I envied these boys the easy time this monthly remittance provided. By and by, they returned home with their sheep skins and other things too, among them being the capacity for great quantities of whiskey. One of those boys is now under the suit and other is an insane asylum, a victim of disease. Last year, I had the privilege of speaking in the college where one of the boys went to school. The principal of the school told me that $100 check, which came monthly for that boy, was the influence that undermined him. With that check, he had to go be a good fellow. This led to the drink habit and led to ruination. I can see now that fate dealt me a lucky blow when it placed the great cosmic org of necessity behind me in my early childhood and forced me to struggle for a schooling and for existence itself. That struggle seemed hard then, but I know now that it was a strengthening process I needed to prepare for me, a man's work in life. My own boys are coming along now, and in spite of the powerful moral which I have drawn from my own experience and from my observation of the two boys mentioned, I see myself inclined to make it easy for my boys when I can. This is a common tendency, a human sort of tendency perhaps, which can lead nowhere but to distress and grief when the child is called upon for the reserve strength that is not there because he has never met with the necessary resistance. It may seem like a trite statement, but it is none less true on that account. To to say the only permanent good that can come to a child comes out of what he does for himself. The greatest service that can be rendered any person on earth is the service which causes that person to rely upon himself. When you pitch a dime to a beggar, you may benefit him temporarily, but in the long run, you have done him a decided injury because you have taken away from him the necessity of struggle. I met a man in Lawton, Oklahoma, on my recent tour of the country, who gave me much food for thought. I had ridden out with him all afternoon in an automobile before I had learned that he was a stone blind. His dark glasses covered his eyes, and not a sign of his affliction was to be seen on his face or detected from his voice. He laughingly carried on one of the most interesting conversations I have ever listened to, and entertained me so splendidly that I did not notice his blindness. Afterward, I learned of the man's early struggles. He had lost his eyes at the age of 4. Several years ago, he presented himself at Northwestern University in the city of Chicago for a military coloration as a student. The official refused to accept him, urging him not to undertake a stiff course such as tried the strength of able-bodied young men and women to the utmost. But this young fellow knew no defeat. He was persistent. Finally, the university official asked him how much money he had with which to pay his way through school, and he replied, $35. They told him that he would only be wasting his time to start in school with his handicap without sufficient funds, and advised him not to try it. He went out and walked around the block a time or two and then came back and said, "Now look here, let me enter for the first semester, and if I do not keep up with my classes and pay my way, you can turn me out." They consent largely, I suspect, because they did not have the heart to refuse. This young man not only completed the first semester with honors as the head of his classes, but he finished the entire course leading all the way through. But this is not all. He paid his way by taking notes in the lecture rooms, transcribing them on the typewriter, and selling copy to his fellow students, those who had 2 perfectly good eyes and money in the bank beside. Really, does a person ever have opportunity to test the limits of his ability? We can accomplish pretty much whatever we make up our minds to accomplish. If we are not forced to test our strength through dire necessity, through struggle, through hardship, we seldom discover our possibilities. Laid down as a gentle rule, and a sound one at that real strength comes from struggle, hardship, adversity, and handicaps imposed upon us by causes beyond our immediate control. If we could control these causes, they would not exist because we would eliminate them, thereby depriving ourselves of the most beneficial experience that can come to a human being. 20-odd years ago, I found myself forced to work as a laborer in the coal mines. Nothing short of necessity would have induced me to perform such work. Yet out of that very work came experience that has placed and is now playing no small part in the very best service I have rendered and will continue to render my fellow men. We are in the midst of a great industrial crisis, not alone in America, but throughout the world, and much of our effort is directed toward the elimination of the cause out of which these crises grew. These efforts have not been without visible results, something that would not have been possible except for the forced service rendered in the coal mines years ago. This brought me close to the people who labored in those mines and gave me a splendid chance to study the condition under which they were, their grievousness of which they complained, their faults and their virtues. Now, when I presume to write for or about those who perform the most lowly sort of labor, I write not as one whose hands were never covered with grime and dust of honest toil, but as who has worked shoulder to shoulder with these men whose voices are now crying for justice and fair treatment. And when I send back the message to the laborers out of whose ranks I came, urging them to perform more work and better work than actually paid for, I know what I am not leading them astray or consoling them unwisely, because it has been this one practice more than any other, and has helped me to grow through of an undesirable, unprofitable environment and get into the work that I love. The reason why this is sound practice is obvious. It develops greater and greater ability until finally a man just naturally bursts out of his cramped environment by attracting the attention of men in a more desirable walk of life. Out of effort and resistance comes strength. The greater the effort, the greater and the compensating strength, and the man who foolishly withholds the best service he is capable of rendering because he may not be receiving what it's worth is only prolonging the time of failure, and knew of no other quality that has paid me greater dividends and carried me further toward my ultimate goal in life, that has the habit of performing more service and better the service with the amount that was actually paid for, but lay stresses on the word habit. This practice must become a habit, and recognition must begin before the real result begin to show. To merely perform more service and better service than is paid for one day, and refrain from doing it the other 5 days of the week, would be something like training 1 hour of a week for a prize fight and wasting the remainder time. Out of resistance comes strength. A man may be born to the wearied middle of toil, but if he understands that out of toil, out of resistance, out of effort, out of adversity comes strength, he will not long remain a victim of his handicap. Instead, he will soon burst the cords of circumstances and environment, no matter how strong they may seem, and rise to claim his own that is born of struggle and hardship. A toast to the man who failed. As my fingers began to play upon the keyboard of my typewriter, I look and see before me a great army of men whose faces show the lines of God and despair. Some are in rags, having reached the last stage of that long, long trail which all men fight to avoid failure. Others are in bad circumstances, but the fear of starvation so plainly on their faces, the smile of courage has left their lips, and they too seem to have given up the fight. The scene shifts. I look again and am carried backward into the events of history past, and there I see also the failures of past, failures which have meant more to the human race, and than all the successes recorded in the history of the world. I see the homely face of Socrates as he stood at the very end of that trail which men call failure, waiting with upturned eyes I see the homely face of Socrates as he stood at the very end of that trail which man call failure, waiting with upturned eyes. Through those monuments which has seen just an eternity, just before the drank poisoned hemlock, I see Christopher Columbus standing in a Spanish dungeon, a prisoner in chains. The tribute paid him for a sacrifice when he set sail on an unknown ocean to discover an unknown world, having that the chances were greatly in favor of his never returning to his native lands. I see the face of Thomas Paine, the man whom the English sought to capture and put to death as a real investigator of the American Revolution. I see him lying in a filthy prison in France, waiting calmly under the shadow of the guillotine, a reprieve from death, and writing as he waited many pages dedicated to the advancement of human liberty. And I see also the face of the man of Galilee suffering on the cross at Calvary, The reward for his effort to entrust men in being decent with one another on her earth, failures all. Oh, to be such a failure ought to go down in history as seamen did, as being brave enough to place humanity above the individual and principle above pecuniary gain. On such failure rests the hopes of the world. The test of a man, the measure of a real man in his ability to see with clear eyes all the beauty and the good and all the injustice and the wrong is in the world and still maintain an even sense of preparation in all things toward all people. I bow to the man who can see the imperfection of mankind without becoming cynical, who can temper justice with mercury, and who can see the good there is in man who disagree with him, who can work in harmony with those whom does not admire, who exercise himself control and lets reason instead of emotion govern his action toward others. Such a man was still immortal Ninkel. He was a man with a message when he had sufficient provision to become a man with a grievance instead. As a reward for his greatness, the world has erected an everlasting monument to Lincoln's name, a monument that the elements shall never disintegrate, that no depredating hand can destroy, a monument built in the heart of the people, built not of stone but of love, sympathy, patience, tolerance, and forgiveness for mankind. Those gentle qualities that memory attaches to his name and which are now rest of the man. The damaging effects of subterfuge and deceit. Nothing really seems to very bad until someone tries to cover it through subterfuge and deceit. We may not agree with the man who boldly admits his shortcomings, but we cannot withhold from him a certain healthy respect on account of his boldness. On the other hand, the moment a person resorts to sacred or to subterfuge, even in connection with matters of small importance, that person becomes immediately marked as unworthy of trust. If there is a skeleton in the closet which is apt to crawl out the plague at the most inopportune time, a mighty good the plan is to voluntarily drag it out and say, "There it is, what are you going to do it about?" People will forgive most anything unless there is an attempt to cover it up and clothe it in secrecy. In that event, forgiveness comes recurrently, if at all. Many a solid friend has been made up by open frankness in connection with matters that, within themselves, were of all small importance, while on the other hand, lifelong enemies have been made by lack of this frankness. If a person is secretive and resorts to deceit and subterfuge in small matters, the supposition is that in matters of greater import, the same tactics will prevail. Deliver from service and better service than you are paid for. This is simple injunction comes from a man who started at the very bottom in the most lowly sort of labor. It constitutes the keynote of almost every public address as man delivers. It permeates nearly everything he writes. It creeps into his everyday conversation. There are many reasons why this is sound of concern, only one of which need be mentioned, namely, every person who forms the habit of delivering this sort of service soon attracts the attention of competitive bidders and offer his service. He stands out above of the common crowd like a skyscraper above the ordinary buildings, and there is keen competition for his labor. Give the best service you know how to render regardless of the amount you will receive for it, and soon, much sooner than you imagine, you will become a marked person, and greater responsibilities and highest ranks will be thrusting themselves upon you. Deliver the best service you can, not necessarily out of consideration for the purchaser, but out of consideration for yourself. Failure to practice this habit is the chief obstacle that stands between 95% of the people and success. But of course, this does not apply to you, or does it? Aimless is a sin, and it leads straight to poverty, misery, want, and failure. A man without a definite constructive purpose in life is simply one of nature's mistakes, because she did not intend to create such a being in all probability. So thanks for watching this video, and we have completed chapter 6. We meet in next video on chapter 7, the magic ladder. So thanks for watching this video. Bye bye, see you in next video.